Well, welcome everyone to the 2022 Watercolour Advent Calendar. A little something I like to do is I made myself a little door so we can have a little reveal and a surprise every day. You're very welcome to make yourself one too if you would really like to. I just got a little bit of watercolour paper, cut it to size, and yeah, just painted a little design on the front. Anyway, shall we see what's behind the door for day one of the Watercolour Advent Calendar? Aha! A Christmas wreath. Grab your paints and let's get started. So let's get started, but first let me talk you through what I've got in my watercolour setup. First off, we've got our advent calendar, and you'll notice I've got a bit of extra paper just covering over the area I'm not going to paint because I want to keep that as pristine as possible. Every now and then you might splatter a little bit of paint or the grease from your fingers, anything like that. We don't want to ruin the rest of our calendar. I've just got a regular HB pencil and rubber eraser that you can get from any stationery store. Nothing special about these, but it's an HB pencil. That's the only thing to note there. And then on this side I've got my paints and my brushes. Now some of you have ordered the watercolour advent calendar kit, so you'll be painting along with the same set of paints and brushes as I have. If you're using your own watercolour setup, that's fantastic. I just make sure you've got some smaller detail brushes as well as your larger brushes. I'm going to be using a size 4, a size 0 and a 4/10, which is lovely and small. I've got kitchen roll here to be able to blot and clean my brushes off, and I've got a jar of water which whenever it gets too murky I'll be refreshing that. Now, a note on the colours. What I've done here is I've woken them all up in advance and painted myself a little colour swatch, because the colours, especially if you're using pans, dried blocks of colour, you find that they are very dark in the palette, and sometimes it's not that obvious how they look when they have water added to them. So if you're using a set of paints that you've not used before, I highly recommend just making yourself out a little series of swatches. And the only other thing to say is this watercolour set that we've been sending out, hilariously, halfway through us sending them out, the company swapped one of the colours out. They changed, they had a white colour and then they changed it to a light red. So what we've done is we've just taken out that one colour to ensure that every single person who's bought the kit, that we're all using the same 11 colours. We've got lemon yellow, Gamboge Hue, Cadmium Red, Alizarin Crimson, Cobalt Blue Hue, Ultramarine Blue Dark, Hooker's Green Dark, Yellow Ochre, Raw Sienna, Burnt Sienna, and Payne's Grey. So that's what we're going to be using. But of course we'll be mixing colours, and the beauty of this is we have a space for mixing up colours just there. So let's get started, shall we? To begin with, I'm just going to do a little pencil sketch of just a little circle. And when I say little, I do mean little, because we don't want it to take up too much room on the page. And I'm drawing it really lightly, a little dashed circle, because we don't really want to see too much pencil. And the other reason is because I am going to draw a bit more clearly. I'm going to draw a bow in the middle of the wreath at the bottom. So draw along with me. Now the bow looks massive, doesn't it? But that's because we're going to be filling out our wreath as we paint it, so it'll be all looking really fantastic. And that's all we need. So let's get painting, shall we? So I want to have a series of greens going on, and I find that a green is always enhanced by what you mix it with. So what I'm doing is I'm getting in some of the bluey tones, some of the Payne's Grey dark tones, and also I'm going to pick up a bit of yellow to mix in with my green as well. All these different tones are fantastic for mixing up different shades of green. So I'm gonna see what I can come up with. So I've just got green going into all of these, and I really enjoy green with Payne's grey. It makes a really nice piney pale green. But I've got my size 0 brush, and I'm actually going to start with some nice light tones, and we're going to start just really simple. We're going to create a really nice simple wreath, and I'm just going to use the circle as, like I said before, a guide to sort of paint around and fill out. So I'm just using the size 0 brush to create a fairly nondescript leaf. It's not even holly at this stage. We're just filling in really nice light tones. Nice and dilute, because when you paint in watercolour, you want to always start with your lightest colours first, because that allows you to layer up on top. And what's happening is we've got lots of little bits of white unpainted space coming in between our little leafy shapes, and that in itself adds a lovely bit of character to our wreath. Okay, so we're going to let that dry and then start adding in some extra green shades. That's dried really nicely, and now I'm going to go down to my 4/10 brush, and I'm going to get a bit more blue, make that a little bit more concentrated. So I'm adding more paint into the palette well here to make the paint just that little bit thicker. And now I'm going to add some holly. So to paint holly, do a central line and then do 1, 2, 3, and then fill it in. And then on the other side, 1, 2, 3, and back in, and then try and fill it in, leaving just that little bit of unpainted space. So I am just going to sort of add in little bits of holly here and there. So I'm just placing in the lines that are going to show me where the holly's going to go. And we're not every time going to see the full amount of the holly spikes, so sometimes we might just fit in 2, or sometimes it might sort of disappear into the wreath. So this is why it's so important to really make sure the first layers you put down are nice and dilute, because it means that you can layer up on top. So there we have our holly nicely nestled in between, and now I'm going to take the sap green mixed with Payne's grey with my 4/10 brush, and I'm going to do a little bit of sort of pine spruce. So I don't need much on the brush. I just want to do little fine lines like that. And the difference in colour is very subtle, but with that and the differing sort of shape of leaf, we get ourselves a nice different foliage. And don't worry about sort of the fact that these pine needles are sort of disappearing into nothing in the wreath, because we've got one more trick up our sleeve. The paper we're painting on is a 300 gram, it's called Tintoretto Gesso. It's a lovely cardstock that's not sort of official watercolour paper, but it's printing. It's a printing stock that I use a lot of, but you can paint beautifully on it. And it's a bit like a sort of textured hot press paper, that's how I'd describe it. Anyway, it's perfect for little illustrations just like these. It's the same cardstock we used last year. For any of you who are joining us again, thank you very much for coming back. It's lovely to have you. And I must say, I really want to see everyone's paintings this year, so do be sure to share your advent calendars on Instagram and tag me, De Winton Paperco, in them, because we'd love to see your paintings, and of course I will share as many as I can. Okay, that's looking really nice. Clean my brush off, and I'm going to get some red, some cadmium red, because I'm sure you can imagine what's going to come next. We're going to put some berries in. So I'm going to use my 4/10 brush again. As I said, we're going to be using these little brushes a lot during this. So I am going to dot them about in the wreath. I'm not going to worry too much about them being sort of right up next to holly all the time. Cadmium red is a nice, fairly opaque coloured watercolour paint, so it can hold its own on top of layers. However, you do want to make sure it's quite thick, quite concentrated to be able to show up. And now, what are we going to do about our ribbon? Well, as I will say throughout this, it's very much your choice if you wish to choose your own colour palette when doing these paintings, but I'm going to go for a nice Alizarin Crimson bow, which is this lovely pinky colour here. I'm also going to just get a little bit of Payne's grey as well. It's a very strong colour, Payne's grey, you don't need a lot. But I'm going to mix a little bit of that together just to give me a great sort of low light colour for the ribbon as well. So I'm just going to allow my wreath to dry 100% and we'll put in the finishing touch for this first day of our advent calendar. So for the last little bit, we've got Alizarin Crimson, and then I have also mixed in a bit of Payne's grey to the Alizarin Crimson just to get that slightly deeper colour. And I'm going to paint in my bow. I never want too much colour on the brush when you're painting something so small. And also we'd love to get a little bit of shine on the ribbon. So I'm just filling it in, and I want to clean my brush off and just blend that a tiny bit. Take a little bit of that darker colour. It might seem like overkill doing these little sort of extra sort of light and dark bits, but I think that's what I love about watercolour the most. So I'm doing this little loop at the top there. I'll do that again, so bring that around into there, and that gives us the top of our bow, and then a few extra little brush strokes out from the middle. And then I'm going to just, with a clean brush, just take what colour we've got there and what colour we've got there. Not a huge amount, that's fine. You just want to make sure you're using up all the colour you've got. Bit of the darker tone. Clean off my brush and just blend what we've got there. So I'm just doing this with the size 0 brush, it's not my smallest. Don't really need the smallest of all until this last little bit. I think I want a bit more control to just get in there. And there we have your first day of the watercolour advent calendar. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow.